tipped his hat towards DeSantis, but has also commented that he thought that Vivek did a great job and sort of said he's a very interesting
Said
candidate.
that during the debate. Did he say, I want to lay off 75% of federal employees, too?
Who? Vivek?
Vivek. He said, I love that idea.
Oh,
I mean, good luck. They're all unionized. They're all government unionized workers. But
the way to get rid of the deep state is to get rid of the unionized federal workers. You have to be able to fire them. That is the number one thing.
It should not be constitutional that the government is on both sides of the bargaining table with unionized employees in the federal
100%.
government. That is something a next Republican should take on.
Yeah. After that last, I think it was the first debate, Fox and Friends was pretty excited about the idea of cutting 75% of the federal workforce. You know, there's actually 2 million federal employees. That doesn't include military members. 2 million. Let's send 1.5 million people into the unemployment rolls. Vivek dug down more. He followed up with these two tweets a few days later. It's fantastic. He wants to actually, the way he's going to do it legally is on day one, he's going to fire 50% of federal bureaucrats. And that's going to be based on if your SSN, your social security number ends in an odd number, well, you're fired. That's going to downsize the government and won't break anything. Sure, Vivek, it won't break anything. I'm sure it won't destroy the VA or major swaths of our intelligence, the 17 intelligence agencies. It's brilliant. But Pete Hegseth and the guys just love this stuff. I'm Fred Wellman, host of On Democracy with FP Wellman, right here on the Midas Touch Network. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about the personnel aspects of what the Republicans are planning as part of their next administration they're planning for. Project 2025 is something you've heard about already. If you've watched a couple of my videos or my show, I talk about it a lot. This is the effort led by the Heritage Foundation with about 80 other groups, a massive effort to essentially dismantle our government. And I want to get into really sexy stuff this time. People. I mean, woo, it's going to be great. But I got a plan. Don't worry. And we're going to talk about two aspects to this before we get into it. So you know, we're going to talk about first, what is Schedule F, which you'll hear a lot about, and what are they doing to implement this plan, this recruiting effort. So that's what we're going to talk about. And you know, I want to get first with what some of the other presidential candidates are saying. Here's Nikki Haley. So Nikki, her big jam right now is she comes up with the middle ground. You know, she was doing this on abortion, too. She doesn't want to completely outlaw it. She wants to find a reasonable accommodation. Just 6 weeks. And this is her jam. So instead of 75 or 50% of the workforce being fired, Nikki's got a different plan.
Under my plan, we won't just have term limits for politicians. We will limit bureaucrats, too. No bureaucrat should hold the same position for more than 5 years. This will make them better public servants when we rotate them and avoid the politics and the power fiefdoms that corrupt our government. And we should be able to fire those who are not performing.
There's a lot in that one. It's a lot of great Republican gobbledygook speak because they hate the bureaucracy and the deep state. So Nikki's plan is you can only stay in your job, for 5 years. Do you know we have 175,000 scientists in the United States government, 14,000 physicians at the VA alone, okay? So we're just going to take a knife to that, those expertise. Imagine what that's going to do to the nuclear scientist, or how about NASA? We don't want any fiefdoms at NASA where they're launching rockets into fucking space. That's the stupidity of this whole thing. But where is this coming from? Well, look, if you followed Republican politics for years, they've always hated the government. Big government's the enemy of everything. It's all they talk about is cutting government. But what's different this cycle is they've got a very robust plan, and they're doing it very differently. And we need to be aware of it. We need to tell everyone we know about this, and we're going to go from there. And that's Project 2025, as I mentioned. And so if you're following again, if you're not familiar with it, Project 2025 is the effort, as I mentioned, by Heritage Foundation. Now, look, they've done this at Heritage for years. Every new administration, they put out sort of a roadmap for the new Republican administration to take over and to follow. But what's different this year is they've actually gotten about $22 million in dark money, recruited every other far-right nut job group in the planet to come work with them. As I mentioned, 80 groups supposedly have signed on. And they've got a very robust plan, almost 1,000 pages in very detail. But what's next is the next level. The next level is what they're actually doing to implement the plan now, so that on day one, it's going to take over. So in the past, it was sort of a a think tank thing. Like, oh, hey, here's your plan, here's your roadmap. It's much different this time. And let's talk about the beginning, what I mentioned, Schedule F. So what is Schedule F? Now, I'm going to read this because it's important. Schedule F was something that it's an executive order that Donald Trump tried to implement right as he was leaving office in 2020. And it's the idea of a different schedule. So employees of the federal government fall on different, quote, schedules of where they are in the civil service. Now, the history of our civil service, I won't give you a history lesson because, God, nobody wants that. It's boring. But it's important to know that we have what's called a professional civil service system. There are very strict laws and regulations that guide who can be involved, how we get a diverse workforce, and protections so they're not easily fired. Now, why do we want to make it hard not to fire government employees? Now, a lot of people see the negative. Look, I saw it myself when I was a military officer. It's not a perfect system. But by the same token, you want government professionals who can tell political people, hey, that's a terrible idea. You're going to break the law and not be afraid they'll be fired for it like you could in a company, an at-will company. What Schedule F, though, is essentially to flip that on its back. Now, they made it seem very innocuous. It said that it would affect tens of thousands of civil servants. And by the way, throw this up on screen. This is background info from the National Federation of Federal Employees. It's a union. They said it will affect thousands of employees. They'd be reassigned as Schedule F employees. And these employees will lose their employment and union protections upon reassignment into Schedule F, making them functionally at-will employees and therefore far easier to fire. That's really the goal, right? And you saw that in that opening clip, root out the deep state. And you're talking a lot of people. So who's affected this? By essentially what they said is Schedule F is an effort to influence policy-making positions. Now, what's a policy-making position? Well, good luck trying to define that. A policy-making position could be anything from somebody who works at the Office of Management and Budget, who says what the impact of the budget will be, to someone at the Department of Defense who decides which weapon systems to field. That's policy. There's a million ways. You can define a policy-making position in almost any way possible. And here's where it got really interesting. Back in 2020, here's a headline from I think government executive saying, "Oh, the architects of this plan, look, all these worries." It's just hyperbole, folks. It's the enemies of the deep state operatives themselves are the ones complaining about Project 2025 and Schedule F reimplementation. Because, Biden threw Schedule F out the minute he took office. Trump never got to implement it, but he did put out the word for agencies to evaluate their departments and turn in to the government, I think GAO or someone, to turn in a list of the positions they thought should be moved to Schedule F. Again, policy-making positions. And here's where it got interesting that people are forgetting. The Trump-appointed head of the Office of Management and Budget, a very key government agency that is full of professionals, many have been there for decades, analyzing the budget. He suggested, you're not going to believe this number, see this headline, 88% of his employees should be converted to Schedule F to make them essentially at-will employees, and therefore have to listen to the political winds of the president. And the article, if you read that article, he flat out says that's the point, that they're being stymied by these bureaucrats who won't let them implement things which are essentially illegal. Okay? That's the point of having these. So that whole thing about being just policy-making positions is blown apart when you see who the Republican-appointed, Trump-appointed leaders of those departments were designating as Schedule F. It isn't just a few thousand, it's tens of thousands. And let me give you some perspective on what kind of numbers we're talking about. There are 2 million employees, as I mentioned, and then the senior service, the senior executive service, which is kind of like the general officers of the civil service, if you will. These are very senior people. There's 8,200 of them. Okay? And then above them, there's about 4,000 political appointment positions within all the federal departments of government. Seems like a lot when you talk about how big our government is. It's not, but but if you think about that number, when a new administration comes in, they have to immediately, so after the election, November 5th, 6th, and they take office January 20th, they have about 2 months to recruit thousands of people, and it takes years sometimes. 4,000 political appointments had to be made in that 2 months. Well, not exactly, but the key ones like that goes from cabinet secretaries to assistant secretaries to deputy undersecretary, assistant deputy undersecretaries, on and on and on. All these political positions. It's a laborious process and it takes a lot of work. And it's 4,000 is a big number. So what does that tie into what they're telling us? So here's the next piece of this puzzle. I want you to keep those numbers in mind as we move to the next piece of the puzzle. And here's a headline where we're talking about how Axios did a story about how they are currently screening this huge power grab. It's a power grab. And that's what everybody's calling it, is a power grab. Because why? Here's what they're doing. They've just started screening and recruiting thousands of people that they're going to bring into the government. Look at the screenshot of the story itself. They're aiming to recruit 54,000 tried and true Republican Trumpists. They're using AI to scrub all these applicants' social media even to make sure they're truly true believers in the Republican cause and the Trump cause. So let's get really deep what we just heard. I told you there's 2 million employees. 8,200 of those are senior executive service members who are our most senior people who've been there for decades, guiding our government. And then 4,000 political appointees. They want 54,000 essentially political appointments. They're going to convert almost the entire top echelons of the United States government to political appointees of the current party, which they assume will be the Republicans. That's what they want to do. Chew on that number. It's a giant number. And look, I'm not going to say the government system is perfect. It's not. Everybody knows. But there's some real lies you heard within this video and the clips I showed you. First of all, Pete Heggs is saying, well, they're all unionized, so it's impossible to fire them. Okay, that's not true at all. Only 33% of federal employees are unionized. And that's not, and people say, well, that's because of the military. No. We're talking the 2 million federal employees. Only 32% are in unions. They're not allowed to strike, by the way. And the civil service pay is set up by the government, okay? There's these myths about the unions. Mostly it's for collective bargaining and for protections. But the civil service itself protects them from easy firing. But they are firing. Over 10,000 federal employees are fired every year. It's not impossible to fire, but you just got to do it right. And as I mentioned, these are huge numbers of experts. The United States Department of Defense has 950,000 employees, civilian employees. People are shocked by that number because then you have another million plus of service members. But why? Because service members are only in for a short time, anywhere from 3 to 4 years to 20, and they change jobs. I changed jobs in the Army almost every single year. So the continuity within military organizations is provided for professional civilians. I remember being a Forces Command. It's the headquarters that was in Atlanta at the time. It's now in I think it's in South Carolina, North Carolina. And at Forces Command, while we had military officers like myself doing the training and the planning and the deployments, it was the civilians that saved us because they'd been there a long time. They could say, hey, we did this back in 91 when Desert Storm. Let me help you write these plans. Hey, I know exactly what file folder these plans are in. I mean, the civil service at the DoD is hugely important, full of dedicated Americans that your friends. 75% of them at DoD are veterans themselves. So when these guys come in and say they want to fire all these people, they're talking about veterans, disabled veterans. They're talking about your friends and neighbors. They're talking about 17 intelligence agencies, 17, who rely on deep expertise. Why would we fire all the Russia experts or the Iran experts? Because that's what you're talking about doing when you talk about huge firings like that or only a 5-year term limit. They want to politicize the government in their own image. And it's very, very, very malignant and very malevolent. This is not we're going to clean up the bureaucracy and make it more efficient thing. There are things that can be done. There are laws that need to be passed. There are things we can do to tweak the system. But the idea of a wholesale appointment of 54,000 or more hardcore MAGA who've actually had their social media scrubbed to make sure they never said a negative thing about Donald Trump, and then infusing them in the highest echelons of our government is devastating. Okay? It'll change the way our government is run. It'll change the way everything's done here. And we can't have that. And let me finish with this last point. Why do I know this whole thing is insidious and horrible? Well, as I keep saying, whenever you hear from me, believe them. They're telling us. And here he is, Seb Gorka himself, the Hungarian master. Worked as formerly, he was a White House advisor before he was kicked out. But here's Seb Gorka's tweet telling it just like it is. Root out the deep state and jail them. That's what they're talking about, folks. Those are your friends and neighbors, the people who make sure you get your Social Security check on time, the people who evaluate your disability for your veterans benefits, the people who help homeless people get off the streets, veterans get their surgeries. That's the people they want to throw in jail. Listen to them. Believe them when they tell us what they're doing. I'm Fred Wellman for the Midas Touch Network. I hope you'll tune into my show every Friday night right here on the network. Thanks.